Well, a very good evening, everyone. Welcome to another presentation in the Barts 900 series. My name is Robert Trahan-Jones. I'm chairman of the Friends of Barts Heritage. And you can see us in a slightly different scenario tonight because I'm wearing this distinctive Leander tie. And my reason for doing so is because our guest tonight is none other than the captain of Leander Club, Jack Beaumont. Jack, a very warm welcome to Barts.
Hi, Robert. Thanks very much for having me on. It's a real privilege to be here talking to alumni and doctors and people from a hospital which is really close to my family's heart.
Well, we'll come to those connections in a minute because as you will have realized from the publicity, we're going to be centering on three Barts men, as it happens, who have won Olympic medals over the last 120 years. But first of all, I need to go through the usual announcements. As you know, this is free to view, this webinar, but if you do feel like making a donation to Barts Heritage, then please do go to the Barts Heritage website, but that's bartsheritage.org.uk, and make use of the donate button. For those of you who have donated, your money is being put to very good use, and we are extremely grateful for your input, for the revenue that is being generated for what we all agree is an entirely worthy cause. The discussion with the slides that Jack and I are going to have is going to last some 40-45 minutes. If you've got any questions during the session, then do please make use of the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll pick up any questions that arise during the session. And then if there's any questions outstanding at the end of the evening, then obviously Jack and I can take those as a separate session. So Jack, now obviously you're a Great Britain international rower. Tell us briefly, if you will, about your progress starting out as a club rower, school, and then into the GB international scheme.
Okay, so I'm Jack Beaumont. I'm now 27 years old. And my journey started as a 9-year-old. So I was introduced to rowing by my father, Peter, at our local club, Maidenhead Rowing Club. Now, my father was an Olympic rower himself. He competed in the Seoul Games, finishing 4th. And so he loved the sport, and I was always around it, visiting, watching Henley Regatta each year. And so I was quite interested and went down to the local club. And it was really fun. I loved hanging out with my friends down there, going out, splashing around in the boat, eating some ice cream, and spent a lot of time down there. And as a byproduct of spending time there, got pretty good at it. So I spent, I'd go as a hobby a few times a week and racing at the weekends, and then went to my first sort of junior trials whilst racing there. I also rowed for my school, Sir William Borlase in Marlow, and had a great time. And in my final year, got to compete and win at Henley Royal Regatta. Now, for me, the real rowing bug, if I hadn't already caught it, came when I watched the London 2012 Olympic Games. For that to come so close to my hometown of Maidenhead, on the lake you can see behind Robert's back, was hugely inspiring. So watching that, I think, changed the course of my life. As I watched my heroes achieve their Olympic dreams, I decided to withdraw my university application for a year and join Leander Club. So since joining Leander Club, I did complete a degree at Birkbeck, University of London. I rowed for the University of London as well, and now can train full-time in the GB rowing team.
Excellent. Well, we'll be coming on to towards the end with more of your achievements in rowing, because we want to talk about your Barts connection, because your mother's parents, John Harrison and Judy Merricks, were a Barts doctor and a Barts nurse, were they not?
They were. So my grandfather and grandmother, John and Judy, are hugely proud, or were, they sadly have both passed away now, but they were hugely proud of their time at Barts. And it's actually the place where they met. So the story goes, the legend goes, that in late December in 1963, just like that song, there was a big snowstorm. And the legend is that the nurses piled up snow outside the doctor's room, outside their accommodation. And the doctors retaliated to this with a huge attack of snowballs, and a mass snowball fight followed, and which followed by more drinks in the bar. And this is where John and Judy met, and the rest is history.
Well, I don't know any other medical student and nurse antics like that, I'm sure. On contrary, I think it's been the same down the ages, but that's a great story. And tell me about their later careers, because I think John went into a career in the Navy Medical Service, is that right?
He did. So my grandfather, John, he joined the Navy and travelled all around the UK and France, in working in different ports and spending time on submarines and looking after the guys in the Navy. He spent a lot of time in the south of France, in Toulon, working with the doctor, his French counterpart, and loved it so much that he ended up moving down there, or they both did. And he then, after his time in the Navy, then served as a doctor in the Sussex Police. His final job was as my biggest fan and cheerleader. My grandmother, she spent some time nursing, but then very soon had my mum, and then had four more sons afterwards, and spent a lot of time as just being a full-time mum. She also then went back to university and studied a PhD in history.
That's fantastic. Well done to both of them. Now, of course, your grandmother was a member of Set 59 in the Barts nursing hierarchy, and we have a couple of members of Set 59 who are joining us tonight. So I'm sure that this broadcast will bring back memories for them in particular. But we'll come back to your grandparents. For the time being, let's move on to the first of our memories tonight, because we want to talk about Raymond Etherington-Smith, who won a gold medal for rowing at the 1908 Olympics. Now, Etherington-Smith was the son of a lawyer who lived in Putney. So you might think, well, rowing was in his blood, but that's not the case, because Etherington-Smith Sr. sent his sons away to school at Repton, which has a fine sporting tradition, the public school in Derbyshire. But Etherington-Smith didn't really shine there at all. In those days, Repton did row, but he came out of school without any academic or sporting accomplishments. And it was only when he went up to Cambridge University to start his medical studies that he got the rowing bug. And within a couple of years, he was recognized to be a very fine oarsman indeed. And in fact, he rowed in the boat race for Cambridge on 3 separate occasions, including 1899, when he was president of Cambridge. And what we're looking at now is a photograph of Raymond sitting down there in his Cambridge blazer, and his brother Tom, who rowed for Oxford. And until relatively recent times, this was the only occasion on which brothers had rowed against each other in the boat race. And it was while I was undertaking some research the next time that happened, some 15 years ago, that I finally hit upon the fact that there was only one previous instance. But like so many Oxford and Cambridge Blues before him, Etherington-Smith then went on to a clubhouse that Jack and I certainly recognize, which is Leander Club in Henley. And this is what it looked like in his day in the early part of the 20th century. And you can see, although it was built in 1896 as an entirely new build, it already looks reasonably mature even in those days. And you can see on the left of the building, the steps leading up to the main entrance. Keep an eye on those steps, because I'll be referring back to them in a couple of slides' time. And as a predecessor to Jack, Etherington-Smith was elected captain of Leander on no less than 4 separate occasions, which is a mighty fine achievement. So that was Leander Club, how it looked then, and this is how it looks now, if I can get the slide to work. And it's exactly the same picture as you see, the one for Jack's backdrop. Now, tell me, Jack, I suspect that the role of captain of Leander in his day was rather different to the role that you have to undertake. Have you been able to get some sort of comparison between then and now?
Well, there's a few comparisons. Well, even if you just look at the two pictures, you can see how the club has changed. Now it's this grand building we refer to as the Pink Palace. And what has really changed as a club is it's gone from being a members club, maybe a gentleman's club for men that was for alumni of Oxford and Cambridge mostly, and the gentry, whereas now it is a high performance rowing centre. We now have around 70 athletes training there every day with aims of making the Olympic team. Now, in Etherington-Smith's day, it was much more, his role as the captain was to find a bunch of really good rowers who he could tempt to represent the club at Henley Royal Regatta. And he did a very good job of that. But for me now, we have the athletes. Our club has a reputation as being the most successful rowing club in the world. If you compare it to, say, football, we are Real Madrid or we are Barcelona, Leander. So people want to come to us. Now, my role is to make sure that they're successful and to make sure that they're enjoying it and to make sure that they have all the things they need to get the best out of themselves. So I think of myself as a bit of a mentor, but also a link between the board and directors of the company of the club and the athletes.
Very good point. And let's not forget, of course, that the League of Nurses, those members who are watching will be aware that we have organised a tour for members of that league to look around Leander and maybe meet a few of the athletes early in September. So hopefully that will come off. That's been postponed from last year for obvious reasons. So you make a good point about the captain's role. So let's talk more about the Henley course, because we can spring right forward now to 1908. It's the first time that London hosted the Games. And here is the Henley Royal Regatta course, which is a reasonably familiar sight to many people who still come to Henley, because those of you who visited the regatta will recognize a similar scene then and now, maybe not quite so many people watching from the punts moored to the booms on the near side, but certainly in the enclosures over on the far side, that the numbers there and the way in which they're so brightly dressed still has resonance today. Let's not forget that Pierre de Coubertin, Baron Pierre de Coubertin, the Frenchman who was the founder of the modern Olympics, was very much a fan of Henley Regatta. And in fact, he modeled the International Olympic Committee on the stewards who run the regatta. And so it was scarcely surprising that when London got to host the Games for the very first time in 1908, the rowing events would be based on largely what was the Royal Regatta course. There were only 4 events at that time. And here is the men's eights, the final. And here we see Leander, a club, beating Belgium, a country, for the gold medal. And the reason why a club should be mentioned in that way was because in those days, a nation was allowed to enter more than one crew per event. That's not the case these days. So in fact, there was a second Great Britain crew, which was Cambridge University, and they got the bronze medal on that occasion. But Great Britain won gold in all 4 events, so it could be said to be our best ever rowing Olympics. But Jack, you're familiar with some more recent times, because let's face it, GB has topped the medal table in the rowing events at Beijing and London and Rio. Give us a bit of a perspective on that, because you came in off the back of that success, did you not?
Yeah, so it's fantastic to be a part of such a successful team. Now we've not managed quite the clean sweep they managed in 1908, but it's probably fair to say the world has moved on. Now, if I think about our rowing team, our British rowing team, which is the pride of our Olympic team, as a team, there's been a gold medal won at every Olympics since 1984 for Great Britain, which is amazing. And it's something we hope to continue this year in our delayed 2020 Tokyo Games. But yes, we've had huge success. So especially with the advent of lottery funding, the athletes are able to train full time, and that's 3 sessions a day, every day, with the aim to perform at the Olympic Games. And what has been even better to see is the success of our women's team. since 2000, when they won their first Olympic medal in the women's quadruple sculls. There have been silver medals at every games until London, where they finally managed their first gold, which was very quickly, 2 days later, followed by another gold. So we have had a huge amount of success. It's getting tougher at the top every year, but we're trying to move with the times.
Thank you. Well, let's just go back to 1908, because such was the success for Etherington-Smith, sitting here in the 5-seat of the in the middle of that crew that you can see winning the gold medal for Great Britain. Gathered then together afterwards in celebration on the steps at Leander were all the GB gold medalists as a group here, and that's Etherington-Smith there in the front of the photograph with his arms folded. I always think they look rather solemn, despite the fact they've won Olympic medals, but that was the Victorian way. And let's face it, because of the camera exposure, you had to put on a fairly fixed expression, otherwise you appeared blurred as a result of the photograph. And the poignant thing about this photograph is that if they had tried to take that same photograph again 10 years later, after the Great War had taken place, then less than half those men would have been able to take part. So just to the left of Etherington-Smith, we can see Don Burnell, who was a fellow member of the GB8. He survived and went on to become president of Leander in the 1960s. And then on the higher step behind Burnell, we've got Frederick Kelly, who was a famous musician. He retired after the '08 Olympics because he was worried that the effort of rowing continually would alter the sensitivity of his hands when he was playing the violin or the piano. And then down to the left, wearing the cap, we've got Gilchrist McLagan, who was the cox of the GB men's 8. And he, again, was one of the athletes that lost their lives in the Great War. So many stories, but as I say, so many lives lost. But let's not forget that while all this was going on, Etherington-Smith had gone from being a student at Barts, then to being a demonstrator in anatomy. And by the time the '08 Olympics occurred, he was already an assistant surgeon at Barts. And here he is as a member of the surgical team, standing there in the center of the photograph with his hands in his pockets. And there's his boss, William Bruce Clark, wearing the top hat. When did consultants stop wearing top hats, I wonder? Certainly before my time. And sad to say, although this photograph was taken probably shortly after the Olympics, the two leading members of this surgical firm, that's Etherington-Smith and Clark, were not going to live much longer. Because Etherington-Smith, he was operating on a patient in 1912. The patient had some form of peritonitis. By some error, Etherington-Smith picked up an infection and it spread rapidly in his body as a result in those pre-antibiotic days. And sadly, he died probably of what we would call sepsis in the current time. And he was very sadly missed because he had been such a role model as an Olympian and as a very fine surgeon. And so there were several memorial namings and tablets that were put up in his memory, so that there was a small ward that was named after him. I think this photograph is taken in front of the Kenton and Lucas block, and it was in that block that there was the small ward was named after him, and I think it was only a 2-bedded ward, and it was purely for medical staff who needed hospitalization. And then there was a tablet that was put up on the wall of the operating theatre, which I believe to be the theatre that was in the basement of the East Wing that later became the Gynae Theatre. And Bruce Clark was also not to survive long because although he looks a fine upstanding individual here, he did suffer later with ill health, so he only survived Etherington-Smith for a couple more years. And the story I love about him, I mean, he was a very fine teacher, very fine surgeon, but he was quite a tough physical individual. He was a noted boxer in his day, and in fact his nickname was the Bruiser. And the story goes that somebody was unwise enough to try and mug him in the street on one occasion and suffered a broken jaw from the surgeon as a result of this. So the surgeon, Bruce Clark, picked him up, admitted him to one of his own wards so that he could treat him and make him better and send him on his way, presumably a sadder and a wiser man. So we move on from Etherington-Smith and we move on to the second of our star names, which is Hira Bristow Stallard. H.B. Stallard, evidently the name Hira, which he inherited from his father, who also had the same first name, was a bit of a mouthful for his friends at school, who christened him Henry instead, and Henry he remained for to his friends throughout. And he was quite a character. He started his running career at school. Like Etherington-Smith, he went up to Cambridge and he raced for his college, and he rapidly gained quite an athletic pedigree, and he started winning not only for Cambridge, so that he won the mile race against Oxford University for 3 years on the trot, and he was also UK national amateur champion over 3 distances, the mile, the half mile and the quarter mile, for 3 successive years. So it was no surprise to anybody that he went on to be selected for the 1924 Olympics. And those were the ones that were hosted in Paris, and many of you will be familiar with them as the so-called Chariots of Fire Games, because here is the actor who played H.B. Stallard, Daniel Gerrold, who obviously had a starring role in that particular film. And the reason why there's that title, The Olympian Ophthalmologist, is that the Royal College of Ophthalmologists decided to do a biopic on Stallard and featured this as part of the title sequence. And Stallard really was quite a character, and he got selected at the 24 Olympics along such household names as Harold Abrahams and Eric Liddell. In the 800 meters final, well, this is what happened, because here he is at probably a relatively early stage in the race, and you can see the names there, but it was his compatriot Douglas Lowe who got the gold medal on that occasion, followed by Skylar Enck, the American on the left there, and then Paul Martin, the Swiss athlete on the right. And Stallard was unlucky enough to miss out in 4th position. And one of the reasons for his lack of success was because unknowingly he had injured his foot, and his foot injury went on to be a problem, including when he ran the final of the 1500 meters, in which he was doubling up. But the good news is that Stallard went on to win the bronze medal, despite the fact that he was in excruciating pain, so that this is what the press cuttings looked like afterwards, that he collapsed in agony because he had really worked through that pain. Now, obviously, this is something that many athletes at the top level will be familiar with. And for the orthopedic surgeons amongst you, it transpired that he had stress fractures in both navicular bones, in both ankles. And in fact, that was one of the reasons why he chose to retire from competitive athletics some 2 or 3 years after the 1924 games. Jack, rowing injuries don't necessarily involve the ankles, do they? It's not one of the stress areas in rowing. What are the common areas in which rowers might injure themselves? Because you've got a particularly unusual story, haven't you?
I do have an unusual story. I'll start with the normal injuries. So the most normal injuries for rowers tend to be from overuse, and they tend to be issues with the discs, normally in the L4, L5 area of the spine, prolapses and that sort of thing. And the other big issue that people have at the moment, which is quite common, is labral tears inside the hip joint. And it's just from that repeated deep flexion and picking up load in fairly weak positions. Another fairly common injury is to get chronic exertional compartment syndrome in the forearms. So when people are racing for a long time, to get being unable to sort of flush lactic acid out of their forearms, and I ended up having a surgery, a fasciotomy, I think they said, fasciotomy on my forearm, where they cut from here to here and sliced all the fascia open. But my unusual injury came from rowing, is that I was training in Portugal on a lovely training camp, a lovely summer's day, and had a really unfortunate crash, a collision with the world's fastest eight-oared boat. And that hit me in the back, and I suffered from fractures to all of my transverse processes in my lumbar spine on my right-hand side, as well as a torn psoas muscle. So that was a pretty big injury, and for a while I thought that might take me out of a boat and definitely out of the Rio 2016 games. But I had a long rehabilitation, and fortunately I'm back to rowing.
Well, thank goodness for that. I'm sure we all agree. Certainly an unusual injury, and yes, it's good to hear that. Not only that, but also the other injuries you describe. Let's not forget that there is proactive treatment, particularly for the non-medical members of the audience. The labral tear in the hip joint means essentially that the cup no longer fits the ball, the head of the femur. But remodeling can be refashioned with a surgical operation, and there are a number of successful GB athletes who've had that procedure and been back in the boat shortly afterwards and winning medals again. Okay, back to Stallard then, because having won his Olympic bronze medal, he then went back to being an ophthalmic surgeon, and here he is as a consultant at Barts. Riding in through the archway under the north wing on his bicycle, because it was his bike that he used to use for getting to and fro Harley Street, where he had his rooms. But he maintained his fitness, still doing some gentle running, and the other thing, of course, that in those days a lot of the eye lists were run actually at St Albans Hospital, and Stallard used to take members of his surgical team out to St Albans in his Daimler, and they used to marvel at the way in which, although in the operating theatre he could manipulate fine surgical instruments within a fraction of a millimetre, he appeared to be somewhat more cavalier behind the wheel of his aging Daimler. So he would take corners on two wheels, meanwhile entertaining his passengers with anecdotes all the way to St Albans and back. So he really was quite a character. But of course, there are rowers in Stallard's family, and you will know one or two of them, Jack, because a distant cousin was one of my relative contemporaries, Matt Stallard, whose son Tom was a member of the GB Men's 8, a silver medalist in Beijing, and he was, I think, quietly confident that his own silver medal beat his distant cousin's bronze medal all those years ago. Let's move on, because having spoken about Stallard, we can now move on to the final one of our athletes, and that is the great Arthur Wint, who was a Jamaican athlete, the first ever gold medalist for Jamaica in any sporting discipline, and he won gold at both the 1948 and the 1952 Olympics. And here he is, and believe it or not, with Stallard there sitting in the front row as president of the United Hospitals Athletic Club, and there is Arthur Wint as a relatively recent arrival to Bart, standing in the middle of the back row. And you can see how much taller he is than the rest of his club mates, because he was known colloquially as the gentle giant. He got quite an athletic pedigree even before he arrived at Barts on a scholarship. So while he was at school, he ran sprints, he did the high jump, he did the long jump, he excelled at all the sporting disciplines at school, and then he won a gold at the Central American Games in Panama. And then in 1942, he joined the Commonwealth Air Training Plan, And although he was training for active service as a pilot, he then went and set the Canadian 400-meter record while he was undergoing that training plan. And then after serving in active combat during World War II, then he left the Royal Air Force on demobilization, and he came to Barts as a student on a scholarship. And then, as I say, was able to train for 2 successive Olympics because he was somehow able to sandwich these in to his medical career. Jack, I suppose the question does beg itself, surely. How on earth do you fit in a demanding academic course at the same time as being an elite athlete racing for your country at Olympic level? Is that possible in this day and age? Give us some idea of what a normal day for you involves.
Yeah, I think it's possible in some sports, but the huge training demand required for rowing makes that really difficult to do. We do have some doctors or medical students on our team, but they've all taken a hiatus from university to do it. So a normal day for me would start with, so I'll get to the training center at 7:30, and it would start with a 2-hour-long weight session. And we'll be working on mostly our lower body strength, because it's really the legs, the glutes, and the trunk muscles that really drive the boat forwards. And so that's all about getting powerful, but also injury prevention. That would be followed by a rowing session, which would be around 20 kilometers, which takes somewhere between an hour and 20 minutes to an hour and 40 minutes. And then we'd have a break for lunch. And then our final session for the day would be about 1 hour long on the rowing machine. So that would be a pretty standard day, and it is exhausting. And then we spend a lot of time also on training camps all around the world, a lot of that at high altitude, where we do the same sort of training, but it's even harder.
And let's not forget, of course, that although you are in essence full-time athletes, because as you know, I spend a lot of my time promoting the sport in various scenarios, people go away with the idea that you are professional athletes and that you're somehow on the same sort of salary as a Premiership footballer. And that's not the case, is it?
Oh, absolutely not. I wish it was the case. No, it's not the case. We are relatively amateur still. We do get paid, and we are fortunately supported by the National Lottery, and we're provided with a training grant, which covers our training and living costs. But it's I'd say probably the lowest paid footballer in the Premier League earns the same amount in a week than the best paid rower does in a year.
Okay, useful stuff to remember. Well, once he qualified, Arthur Wint went home to Jamaica, obviously as a hero. He was welcomed as a role model. As I say, he was the first Jamaican gold medalist in any sporting discipline. And here he is winning the 800 meters in London 1948. And he went back and he lived a relatively quiet life. Now, as a GP in the eastern end of Jamaica, but as you can deduce from this particular photograph, the powers that be persuaded him to come back into the public arena in later life when he was invited to join the Jamaican diplomatic service and was sent back to Britain as the High Commissioner in London for Jamaica. And not content with simply having one role, he also took on the role of ambassador to both Sweden and Denmark, despite the fact that he was based in London. So he really had to work hard during the 6 or 7 years that he took on that role. And during that time, though, it wasn't all the highfalutin with the grand functions and things. He really got out and about to meet his fellow countrymen. And here he is doing a visit to the community in Brixton, because, of course, a number of these people had either come over on the Windrush or one of the similar vessels, bringing people from that part of the world to live and work in Britain. And Arthur wanted to hear about their experiences and in their new life in this country. But then, having done so and spent time in the diplomatic service, he went back and simply lived out the rest of his days doing what he loved best as a medical practitioner in rural Jamaica. But is still held up, obviously, because of his achievements, really as a great role model, even today. Well, let's get back to you, Jack, because we'd like to hear a bit more about what you've done and the way you've done it. And you've inferred a little about your experience at Henley, and we've talked about Etherington-Smith's performance at Henley. But here you are. How many times have you won at Henley altogether?
I've now won at Henley 8 times, and I'm really hoping to add one more this summer.
Well, that's good. And here you are in the bow seat. So that's the face on the right that we can just see through your crewmate's arm, because you have just won yet again in the quadruple sculls. I think this picture I took, what was it, 7 years ago. Now, of course, let's not forget that not everybody knows about rowing terminology here. So quadruple sculls, tell us the difference. What's the difference between sculling and rowing?
So sculling is where you row with one oar in each hand. It's much more symmetrical, and people say it's more for the single-minded people because you can actually row on your own. Now, if you are trying to row in traditional rowing on your own, you just go around in a circle. So that's the rowing where you row on one side of the boat with one oar. And I'm a sculler, and that's how I've learned to row, and it's what I've always done. Okay,
well, so a four is four athletes in the boat, each with one bigger oar, and a quadruple scull is with the 4 athletes in the boat, but they've each got 2 oars. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad we've got that straight. Now, of course, after the prize giving, there's much celebration, and there's a bit of a scrum for photographs, isn't there? And you showed me this photograph, which I was very surprised to see just a few days ago. Tell me about this photograph.
So this is in the media scrum, or it's media and family scrum after racing at Henley. So we get our prize in. During the prize giving, you get handed your medal and a trophy, and you go behind the grandstand to take photos, and everyone wants their shot. And here is me hugging my mum, whilst you can see my grandmother to the left with her camera. And behind her,
yeah,
that's Judy Merrick's, my grandmother, and behind her is Robert.
Yeah, we're waiting patiently for the right opportunity, although maybe I've just dragooned you into the group that I wanted, and I'm just waiting for the next crew to appear.
Robert, I think you would have been the first one taking the photo.
That's very good of you. Yes, I could always rely on you and the Leander guys to form up for the formal shot before the family stuff takes place later. That's absolutely grand. But your success went on, and a couple of years later, here you are. Now you're in the double scull here with Nick Middleton. So that's 2 of you, each with a set of sculls. And the question that everybody asks me about this photograph is, Jack, you've got your tongue out. What's with that?
Now, this is interesting. So this was also the first year where they had really good televised filming at the regatta. They had started filming it the year before, but this year they had an amazing camera that could really zoom in. And it tended to zoom in on my face and me licking my lips. Now, I didn't really realize that I did this while I rode, but now I know it's kind of when I'm concentrating really hard, I do it. I lick my lips. And also when I'm trying to ignore the pain of the race, I lick my lips. So if you ever see me racing and licking my lips, you know that I'm working pretty hard.
And that's one of the interesting facets of our sport, isn't it? Because to the unseasoned observer, you've got so many guys in the boat doing exactly the same thing at exactly the same time, and they're all making it look so effortless. And yet the lactic acid is building up in your muscles fairly early on in the race. And the guys who can tolerate that pain that the lactic acid is producing, despite everything else that's happening, and concentrate on the work and applying the effort, into the race, those are the ones who succeed, aren't they?
Well, exactly that. I can give you an insight into, so I was racing in the World Rowing Cup at the weekend, and I wear my heart rate strap while we race. And the race is 2,000 meters long. And when I looked at my data, I'd hit 90% of my maximum heart rate after 45 seconds of a 6-minute long race. So it really is, you put your hand in a really hot fire and you have to hold it there.
Well, 2016, Henley Royal Regatta, it's an Olympic year, and that means that all the international crews are away on their training camp. So this is the opportunity for some of the better clubs to have a try at some of the international events, and you and Nick included, because you won that event. But now we fast forward just a few weeks, and it's the Rio Olympics where you were not selected. And yet here you are in the GB men's quadruple scull. So that's you on the right in the bow seat of that boat. How did all that happen?
Wow, that was a whirlwind. So this was nearly a year after my accident when I'd broken those vertebrae. And I was really disappointed to not make the team, as I'd spent so long rehabilitating and getting back into good shape. But I was told that I'd be a reserve for the team and shadow them and sit in the boat if anyone needed me during training. But when it came to the day that they flew off, they went to the Olympics and I was set to watch them on TV. Fast forward 2 days and I wake up to a missed call from the performance director of the British rowing team. And he called me and said, Jack, Graham, one of the guys in the boat, has unfortunately come down with a virus. You need to get on a plane to Brazil tomorrow. So I did as I was told, not knowing what was going on. And actually, funny enough, bumped into Robert at the airport. And he saw me and said, you shouldn't be here. And I said, I can't tell you anything yet, but I'll tell you as soon as I can. And when I arrived in Rio, it was confirmed that I would be replacing Graham and having a very late selection to race in the Olympic Games.
Yes, it was a fantastic story. And I got the shock of my life when I saw you in the departure lounge at Heathrow, because as you know, I was going out there to commentate in Rio and you weren't supposed to be there. And I had to abide by the self-imposed embargo and keep quiet about the story. I would have loved to have broken it early though. But tell me about the event though, because you made the final, but how did it go from there?
Yeah, so we were really pleased to make the final, because you train for 4 years for an Olympic Games. We trained together for 4 days. So to try and do 4 years of training in 4 days, that's quite tough. So we weren't really as synchronized maybe as the other teams. As you can see here, there's maybe the oars aren't quite at the same angle as each other, which is what you'd desire and what you'd like to have. But so making the final was a huge achievement. And on finals day, we had real belief that we could get a medal, if not win. And it wasn't to be. We raced our hearts out and we're sitting in bronze medal position through the halfway point, but we ended up finishing in 5th place.
Well, win or lose, there's one thing guaranteed, and that is that when you come home from an Olympic Games, your family will be there to support you. And there's your grandfather, Bart's man, John Harrison, now retired, ready there to greet you. What's it like coming home from an Olympics in that way? Well,
you know, it was strange because I was called up so late. Of course, my family would have loved to have been there, but it was such late notice that there was no chance. So they did the next best thing and were at Heathrow to greet me. And with my grandfather with that very funny American-looking foam finger. Yeah, it was really lovely. The only problem was we were all hungover. The flight home was a party, and by the time we landed in Heathrow, we just wanted to go to bed. And it was really, really nice, really lovely to see so many people had come out to congratulate the team and were so proud of us. But yeah, we also were feeling a bit worse for wear.
Well, I suppose we've got to talk about Tokyo, because hopefully you're going to be selected for the Tokyo Games. I should mention, I forgot to offer you our congratulations, because you were a member of the GB men's quad in the World Cup regatta in Lucerne, Switzerland last weekend, and you won another bronze medal. So fantastic, and onward and upward, I'm sure. But looking ahead to the Tokyo Games, everybody's asking the question, aren't they? Are they going to go ahead, and what's it going to look like? Can you give us a perspective on that?
Yeah, well, it's been a concern for us too, especially when every day you look at the news and see a bad news story about it. But then I've had to take a step back and think to previous games. Before Rio, they were saying, oh, this Zika virus will be a huge issue and cancel it. And before London, there were issues about whether or not they'll actually have the infrastructure. And before Beijing, oh, this smog's really bad. And all of those games happened successfully. Now, this is a huge, way bigger challenge than they've had before. But I do think it will go ahead, and I do think it will be safe. So there is a huge amount of protocols that we have to abide to and agree to. And there will be daily testing of every single participant in the games. There will be quarantine before flying to Tokyo. There will be testing on arrival. I think it will be watertight. It won't be the Olympic Games experience people are used to. And I think it will be strange without having our own fans. There should be fans, but only from Japan. And I think the really weird thing will be seeing athletes winning medals, and instead of seeing their big smiles on the podium, they'll be wearing masks.
It's going to be very different indeed, isn't it? And on top of that, like you, I'll be out there as an official, as a commentator, and of course we are going to be very restricted in what we're allowed to do and where we're allowed to go. So we are only allowed to be in our hotel or at the venue or traveling between the two. So the partying that you described after Rio, I suspect is going to be out of bounds, because as soon as the rowing events are over, you will have to fly back to the UK, have to quarantine, and then back to normal life.
That's absolutely right. And rowing is such a huge team sport. We train as a massive team every day. And it will be a strange thing, because the rules are you must leave Japan within 48 hours of finishing competing. Now, my event's final will be the first one. I will be home watching a lot of my teammates racing on TV, and that is strange.
Well, we do wish you the rest of the GB team in all the sporting disciplines the very best of luck. Jack, it's been fantastic having you help to guide us through the Bart story, your Bart's connections, and focusing on 3 Bart's men. Who knows? Before too long, hopefully, we may have a Bart's woman that we can talk about in the Olympic history of our hospital. But once again, thank you so much to our audience. Thank you for watching. Again, we very much welcome your feedback. We've offered you something a little bit different tonight, so we hopefully that variety will suit you. And until we meet again, both from Jack and from myself, a very good evening. Bye-bye for now.